left, right and centre, I'm Nidhi Razdan. Tonight, the world has reacted with widespread condemnation to President Donald Trump's announcement that the United States is pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement. But what surprised many as well was his tirade against India, where he accused New Delhi of trying to extract what he called billions and billions of dollars in foreign aid from the developed world for the climate accord. That's actually not true. But what will this mean for the fight against climate change, first of all, and does this cast a shadow on the Prime Minister's visit to the United States later this month?
We're getting out, but we will start to negotiate, and we will see if we can make a deal that's fair. And if we can, that's great. And if we can't, that's fine.
President Trump has turned his back on the planet and resigned the US from its global leadership role. America is the biggest polluter in the world, and today it joins Syria and Nicaragua as being the only countries not part of the Paris Agreement. The decision has met with nearly unanimous global outrage.
Forward, together, not one step back! Forward, together, not one step back!
Sur le climat, il n'y a pas de plan B, car il n'y a pas de planète B. Alors oui, nous continuerons. Because wherever we live, whoever we are, we all share the same responsibility. Make our planet great again.
Entschlossener denn je werden wir in Deutschland, in Europa und in der Welt alle Kräfte bündeln, große Menschheitsherausforderungen wie die des Klimawandels aufzunehmen und erfolgreich diese Herausforderung zu bewältigen.
The deals we have with other countries are
CEOs of leading companies from Apple, Google to GE expressed their strong disappointment. With the CEO of Tesla quitting the White House's advisory council and CEOs of Disney and GE poised to do the same. India and China were especially singled out by Mr. Trump as one of the reasons for exiting the deal.
India makes its participation contingent on receiving billions and billions and billions of dollars in foreign aid from developed countries.
There could be a setback for India's commitment to the Climate Change Pact, as well as an opportunity for India to assert far more influence in the global landscape. Many are looking at it as US really leaving a vacuum of geopolitical leadership out there.
Paris or no Paris, हमारा ये कन्विक्शन है, हमारा ये संस्कार है, हमारी सांस्कृतिक परंपरा है कि हम लोगों को हमारी भावी पीढ़ी के हक का जो है उसको छीनने का हक नहीं है.
So is President Trump willing to sacrifice the future of the planet for the future of his presidency? Many say it's a calculated political move to keep his core base of industrial workers happy for re-election in 2020. A clear sign of desperation from a struggling president who is feeling the heat.
I was elected to represent the citizens of Pittsburgh, not Paris.
But the Pittsburgh mayor hit back. The governor of California, which would be the world's sixth largest economy if it was a country, said he was open to forming an independent climate change alliance with China and others without the seal of the president. Even New York and Washington have come forward to back the climate deal. With Namrata Brar in New York, Soumya Menon, NDTV.
Well, joining us on the program tonight, we have with us Dr. Ajay Mathur, the Director General of TERI, who is also the Indian negotiator at that Paris meeting that led to this climate accord in 2015. Navroz Dubash, Senior Fellow at the Center for Policy Research, is with us. Douglas Buswine, New Delhi Bureau Chief of Reuters. Mr. G. Parthasarathy, former diplomat, and Rahul Tongia, Senior Fellow at Brookings India, also joining us this evening. Mr. Parthasarathy, let me ask you first, and I want to focus on the diplomatic aspect. This tirade that the US President has launched against India and this accusation about billions and billions and billions in dollars of aid, which isn't even true. Do you think that this actually strikes a pretty sour note with the Prime Minister due to go there in just a few weeks?
An American friend of mine told me that whether he's tweeting or speaking, President Trump often lives in fantasy land. Now, for example, I'll give you two examples. he says that we are going to double coal production by 2020. Can anyone who knows anything about industry imagine a country can double coal production in 4 years? The other thing is, all this is playing to a small gallery. The Pittsburgh mayor says we don't need coal, we're quite happy with what we're going, and they're going to get a lot of gas. So, firstly, this argument about India doing this and making no commitments, we have made a very difficult commitment. 40% of our electricity production by 2030 will come from either non-carbon fuels, which non-conventional fuels, maybe solar energy, maybe wind energy and the like, low carbon fuels, or and we have also said that we are not asking for foreign aid. The fact of the matter is, does Mr. Trump realize that all that we are getting this year as so-called aid from the United States is $30 million, which is what our IT companies are now paying extra because of his immigration ban?
So in other words, it is going to cast a shadow on the PM's visit, isn't it?
President of the United States.
Yeah.
Well, I think, look, he is the President of the United States. Environment is one issue amongst many others. This will be seen as his usual rhetoric, like tweeting at midnight. And we'll go about dealing with him because he's the President of the United States.
Well, we'll have to deal with him.
3.5 million Indians.
Certainly, we'll have to deal with him.
We have large economic interest there.
But it's amazing how he's managed to...
But I'll tell you one thing we will do.
Yeah. So just give me a moment.
The one thing we will do is join with the Europeans
yes.
and everybody else.
That's exactly what I want to talk about. I want to talk about that in just a moment, about what India can do in terms of a leadership role. Dr. Mathur, you were there in Paris. How badly does this hurt today?
Okay. There is clearly a loss of US leadership today. This is a huge challenge, and with the US stepping out, there is a huge void. The good thing is that as each country, whether it's India or China or Europe, takes responsibility for doing what they have pledged, we have multiple leaders, not just one leader. That makes the system a lot more robust. There are chances, therefore, that this could be a positive thing. The second is that the pillars on which climate action would occur, renewables and energy efficiency, are moving in a direction where the economics are making them viable themselves. Even in India, solar electricity is now cheaper than coal electricity. A very large amount of climate action now, if countries, including India, continue with getting their policies right, this will start happening. This will become the economic preference. The US action will certainly delay things. It will lead to lower acceleration. It will be difficult for us to reach more ambitious targets than what we have pledged. But I think, for example, in India, the kinds of policies that we have put in place, which have led to the LED program or the renewables program, will help us to meet our targets. They will help many states in the US to meet their targets. The challenge is, how do we help lead us all to more ambitious goals? That's where the problem will arise.
I find it interesting that you do see a silver lining in this. Do you agree with that, Mr. Dubash? Because at the end of the day, the US, though, is such a key component of all of this. And, funding is another issue. I mean, a large part of the funding that countries like India would have got to switch to cleaner technologies would have come from a country like the United States. Now, once that goes, it does make things much, much more difficult.
Yes, I think I broadly agree with Dr. Mathur. I don't think one can tell a story about how this is a good outcome. It would be preferable if this had not happened. At the same time, many of the negatives, in a sense, were already going to happen given this administration. Money was not going to be forthcoming. He made that clear in his budget and in an earlier executive order on energy. That was simply not going to happen. He was not going to be very cooperative in the context of negotiating further all the mechanisms of the Paris Agreement. Again, that was predetermined. So I think there are a couple of silver linings. One is that it's possible that with the US having given notice they're going to pull out, they will be in less of a position to be interfering in a negative way in the negotiations around the future of Paris. I think that is a silver lining. The second is that the other option President Trump was reportedly considering was to stay in the Paris Agreement but lower the US pledge. That, to my mind, would have been more damaging, because that would have set a precedent which other countries would have been tempted to follow. They're not going to be that tempted to follow this precedent because it's a much higher political bar. It's a big deal to pull out. And as Ambassador Parthasarathy said, if countries now close ranks, as they're showing signs of doing, it makes it much harder to pull out. And I think it's very, very important that they close ranks. Very briefly, the third silver lining is the US internal domestic politics now has no option but to really confront how seriously they take this issue. You've seen the mayor of Pittsburgh making a statement, the governor of California. There will be a serious and honest debate. Whereas if Trump had stayed, President Trump had stayed in and lowered the pledge, he could have plausibly told environmentalists, well, I gave you what you want, I stayed in, and he could have told his base, I gave you what you want, and it could have diffused the issue. So actually, I think this is a preferable outcome, and it, in a sense, opens some creative spaces. You might see new and creative alliances across countries. You might see activists in various places mobilizing more forcefully. So I think there's a way to turn this into a positive.
Okay, again, very, very interesting there. Douglas, I mean, again, do you agree with that assessment, countries closing ranks, coming together? That's happening now, and maybe because as journalists we tend to be skeptical about everything. But will that last? I mean, how do you make that last? Will there be a temptation, for instance, for China or even India tomorrow to really lower the bar as far as those goals are concerned? It's not binding anyway, but it just makes it so much harder when the money is not coming in, and if, for instance, other countries start backing off a little bit.
I think there would be a natural temptation for India to lower the bar, to lower its commitment, but what we've heard from the Prime Minister in Russia, from senior ministers in the government, they're staying on board, they're fully committed to the programme, regardless of what others do. So I mean, I think that's an important commitment. I mean, coming back to Prime Minister Modi's trip to Washington, yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, the temperature, we may have climate change and global warming, but the temperature and the relationship between India and the United States has cooled by quite a few degrees, and I think, you know, Trump has shown a technique which is to almost shake people down and say, okay, this is what I'm prepared to do, I'm going to make a gesture, what's your proposal now? So he's really thrust the ball into the court of India. What is Prime Minister Modi going to bring to the discussion in Washington? He's really putting the ball in India's court, and you know, the flourishing of that relationship between the former President Barack Obama and Prime Minister Modi, well, that's a receding memory.
I'm pretty certain, though, as somebody pointed out, that that President Trump will say that Mr. Modi is a great guy when he does go there. But I just want to ask Rahul Tongia of Brookings on that question of countries closing ranks and new alliances. Do you really believe as well that this is an opportunity for countries like India and China to take the lead on this? Do you think that we can get together on this?
I think countries will keep their pledges, and it's not quite clear what it means to close rank, in the sense we already have a flexible Paris Agreement which countries are standing behind, and so as long as they continue to do what they can, and thanks to technology improving, countries are poised to perhaps do even better than their pledges if things continue in terms of prices of solar power, prices of other clean technology, energy efficiency, and maybe batteries. So I think we're unnecessarily grasping for dramatic change in a new world order. It's like, I think Dr. Mathur put it, it's not just one, but there can be many leaders. And when you talk of India and China, they are already in some ways leaders just because of their vast size, the size of their economies, the growth ahead of them, especially for India, and the size of energy requirement that is ahead of them. I did want to pick up on one point that was raised about this aid, about the money involved. India has, as everyone knows, very ambitious targets for renewable energy. A lot of that requires global funding because of the magnitude of funds, and also because it's an attractive opportunity for global funds which are not earning very much returns. You look at sovereign funds in Europe, you look at negative bank rates in Japan. Compared to that, traditionally, energy projects in India would talk of a 10-12% discount rate for debt funding. There is room to get global money in that becomes a win-win opportunity. And a lot of the things about technology transfer, funding, and all of these are not to come from the U.S. government. They're to come from the private sector or third parties. So in that sense, I'm not very worried. And in fact, India's ambitions and growth in the clean space highlights the opportunity that's there for global stakeholders, including American stakeholders.
That's again, I like the fact that all of you have found the bright side to this, because there's been a lot of doom after President Trump's announcement. And Dr. Mathur, on this issue of the U.S., in a sense, abdicating its moral and political leadership on these issues, do you believe that India could actually play a more central role? Do you think that Europe can fill that void? Do you think it can really be many countries coming together, or it needs somebody like Mr. Modi, Xi Jinping, Angela Merkel, one of them to sort of take the lead on this?
In a sense, it's already emerging. Mrs. Merkel's meetings with both Prime Minister Modi and the Chinese President on the one hand,
the Prime Minister in Paris.
The Prime Minister in Paris, we are seeing this multipolar group get together. And I think this is a great thing, because what it has done is there is no, in a sense, banyan tree under which all of these other people cannot thrive. Now you've got these multiple places, all of which with national ownership. This is what is going to make a difference. What is important, however, is, as has been mentioned, the need, I think Rahul mentioned it, that if we are able to have these transparency systems in which each country reports what it has done, then we also build confidence in each other. And that confidence building, I think, is ultimately what is going to be the glue that holds together future action.
Pastor Parthasarathy, how do you think, when Narendra Modi does go to Washington and he's expected to be there in the last week of June, around the 26th, how do you think, he should deal with somebody, as you said, who lives in fantasy land? I mean, it's quite a diplomatic challenge to deal with somebody, who thinks, for instance, that issues like climate change don't exist, and, pretty much makes up news as he goes along, or facts, alternate facts.
No, I think let's be realistic. This was an outburst in an international context. I don't think President Trump has been unfriendly in anything that he has said to us. In fact, some of the things on terrorism and so on coming from his national security advisor and defense secretary are very positive. And I think we will have a positive visit because the relationship has matured. 2 points I wish to make. Most important is India is one of the few countries which enjoys bipartisan support in the US Congress. Thanks largely to our 3.5 million Indians living and doing very well in the United States. So that's something we enjoy across the board, which not many people do. The other thing is, India is a non-threatening power as far as the United States is concerned. We are cooperating in every area, but this all is taking place, remember, at a time when the US itself is becoming a major player in oil and gas, a net exporter. And therefore, for the United States, Mr. Trump may bandy coal around, but there are no takers for coal when you're getting gas at the prices we are getting it. So we will compartmentalize this. We'll make our points of view clear. I hope we leave him in no doubt that we are not looking for the American taxpayers' money to bail us out. We'll manage on our own, and as the other colleagues who have so much experience in environment in this conference have mentioned, there's the whole world to look to. I would particularly now look to Chancellor Merkel and the European Union, because even on issues like the China Economic Corridor, we are on a very similar wavelength with the Europeans.
Yeah, absolutely. But Dr. Saswani, do you agree, though, that this wasn't Trump singling India out, because he seems to have really managed to annoy traditional US allies in a big way in the last couple of weeks, including India?
I think he's made a gesture of which is very provocative towards other countries, including India. he's playing to his base. But I think we also need to look at the practical consequences. We know that America cannot just walk out of the room in a huff. They can't quit the climate accord. It takes 3 years plus one. So at the best, this is an election issue for Trump's re-election bid in 2020. So I think it's this reality TV aspect of his presidency, a flourish, a very, very eye-catching gesture, but what exactly are the practical consequences for relations? I think if we sort of manage our emotional reaction, you can come back and the Prime Minister and his team will have to work towards having a constructive discussion in Washington later in this month and find, points of agreement that they can build on.
Which I'm sure they will. You wanted to say?
Yes, I just wanted to sort of come in on this. I think one reason why the financial argument was trotted out and India was singled out and so on is another phrase in his speech. He said that the climate issue is a pretext for a global redistribution of income. And this is very much one of these narratives on the right in America, where they don't take the issues seriously, and they don't take issues of equity and fairness as we construct them seriously in the climate context. So who actually caused the problem? Who has the capacity to deal with it? This is not part of the language they use. And so really, if you're going to talk about this redistribution, then you have to single out what the issues are for rich versus poor countries, and that's where sort of India comes into the story. And I think that actually, though we've talked about how practically there may be some silver linings, I think in terms of the way in which we talk about the problem, it's very important to push back on the US on this issue in particular. It's almost a perverse appropriation of the language of fairness. He actually talked about how...
I loved what the French president said.
Absolutely, and I think there was a counter-appropriation which was very good. And I think that one has to push back on that. The other practical issue is, if we are going to try and keep warming to below 2 degrees, the US is just too big a piece to ignore. It's close to 20% of annual emissions. And so while it is a little bit separate from pulling out of the Paris Agreement, some of the measures that President Trump has taken is going to slow down effort in the US. And I think globally we have to keep the pressure on to try and have them back into the fold as soon as possible, but on our terms.
As you talk about sort of the practical fallout of this, Rahul Tongia, the last question then is, how realistic is it for us to expect that whatever climate change challenge, the goals that have been set, very clear that with the US pulling out, there would be a delay. But in the long run, is it sustainable without one of the largest polluters in the world being part of some kind of global commitment? Is it sustainable? And what do we do then?
So absolutely. If you look at the impact of the pullout, the treaty will survive. India's actions will continue, as will most countries. And the good news in some ways is subnational efforts within the United States will actually likely increase. So they will go a long way towards what actually happens out of the United States. Now, certainly if there were concerted, coordinated central or federal action from the United States, things could happen faster and better. I think one thing worth highlighting that hasn't been discussed, a colleague of mine at Brookings has a piece that's online that pointed out more people support doing something about climate change than actually support or approve of the president right now. So yes, many decisions are made with a political calculation, but if enough mind space within the United States moves towards doing something about climate change. Now that does not necessarily mean following the Paris Treaty as is, or even a modified version, but at least recognizing that yes, this is a big deal. We have to do something about it, maybe view it with an economic lens of growth and new jobs, new technology, exporting US technology, then I think that politicians will also recognize that, hey, I want to be on the side where voters are, and that may align with what the planet really needs. Is it optimal? No. The US pulling out isn't the best option,
but
I don't think it's fatal. And I think it also, sorry.
No, so I said, as you're saying, it's not a catastrophe, and I think in that context, and it's important, those reactions that we've seen within the United States of various mayors and others who've said, well, as far as our cities are concerned, we're going to stick to the pledges that have been made. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us on the program tonight. This is a big issue, as we said, and now the Prime Minister's meeting with the French President tomorrow is going to be watched much more closely. We will see how the joint statement that they issue will reflect this big development on Donald Trump's decision to pull out of the Paris Accord. Well.